I'm a child of the 80s. I was born in the 70s, and when I was growing up, the 80s were the time. So the music, the movies, the video games, all of that stuff really speaks to me. And whenever there's a new game that capitalizes on the aesthetics that I grew up with, I am nostalgically pulled toward that kind of content, and it's a lot of fun for me. There's just something about the style that went along with the 80s. I mean, not the clothing. You look back and we were making some questionable fashion decisions back in the 80s. I think that most people would probably look back at their childhood and realize that. But the aesthetic of video games and stuff like that really stuck with me as I was growing up. So whenever I play new games that capitalize on that aesthetic, it pulls me in and activates my nostalgia. And 1980X is a game that is doing exactly those things. So let's talk a little bit about what 1980X is. Overall, the idea behind the game is that you play as Kid, who is this teenager in the 80s, and they're not having such a hot time at school. It seems like so far from the very beginning of the story, it seems like maybe the dad has died or taken off or is not around anymore, and the kid ended up going to an arcade, which it seemed like in the beginning might have been a thing that the kid and the dad used to do together. Again, I'm not very far in the game, so I don't know what the overall story is yet. Usually I do things like a first look where I just record the initial beginning of the game so you can see what it's like, but it doesn't work for a game like 1980X. And the reason it doesn't work for a game like 1980X is because it's so many different styles of game. It is arcade games. And this kid who's not too happy with what's going on in their life. They feel trapped in suburbia and they long for living in the big city. They go to this warehouse arcade and they find all of the other outcasts that are like themselves, and they start playing the video games. And over time, the video games become more and more important to the character Kid, and that's literally their name. They become more important to Kid, and you start to see how events or things that are happening in that kid's life can be represented as a game. I can give you one example that isn't very spoilery, but I can give you one example to help you understand exactly what I mean by this. There's a cutscene where the kid is talking about how they're unhappy with high school, and then they see this girl that they are attracted to, and the girl's got this car, and then she gets in the car and she drives away and she slams on the gas and smoke comes off the tires and she takes off. And then the next thing you know, you are playing this old school racing game like Outrun. And if you're too young to know what Outrun is, it's this, I mean, I'm going to probably show video of it right now of what it looks like, but it's basically a racing game where you have a clock at the top of the screen, and if you don't get to the next checkpoint before that clock runs out, then that's it. You're gone. You're done. You are kaput. You are game over, man. Game over. So that's the kind of transitions between the arcade games and the storytelling that you can expect in 1980X. And as I assume that these links between the games that you're playing and the storytelling that's happening are only going to become more and more pronounced and less subtle as time goes on. At least that's what I'm assuming. Again, I'm very early in the game, and most of the time the first looks, I don't have a chance to play the game for very long before I put out the content. So that's what's going on in this game. Now, let's talk about the different genres of games that you might play. It starts out, you are playing this old school side-scrolling beat 'em up game that is very, very reminiscent of Streets of Rage. I mean, your character is wearing blue jeans and a red jacket, just like in Streets of Rage. Although I think in Streets of Rage it's like a red vest instead. But you're fighting these punks with mohawks. It is very much like Streets of Rage. The thing that jumped out to me the most about this particular game is how fantastic the animation is for, the character in the game fighting the enemies. That's got fantastic animations, just very, very fluid. In fact, I wonder if Streets of Rage 4 will look this fluid. I haven't seen a trailer for Streets of Rage 4 in a while, so maybe not, but I think it looks incredibly fluid. You will play through a couple levels of that, and then you will have a boss fight, and then it will be cutscene time. And the cutscenes are really, really long and unskippable, which would drive me crazy, except that they have the most gorgeous pixel art ever. It's just whoever is in charge of the pixel art of the cutscenes has done a wonderful job making it look absolutely fantastic. Going back and playing a second playthrough, not being able to skip the cutscenes is going to really tick me off. But I mean, we all know who we're talking about here. We're talking about Bill. I don't play games a second time unless it's incredibly special or incredibly short. I don't know how long 1980X is. And while I'm very much enjoying it, I don't foresee myself going back and playing through it again. But if you were somebody who would go back and play through again, not being able to skip the cutscenes might be enough to convince me to never be able to do it, because they are very long. They are voice acted, and the voice acting is pretty good. It's just a narration, really. Just so far, it's just one voice that you're hearing the whole time. It's the voice of Kid. And they're telling what's happening to you. So you've got this cool beat 'em up stage, which basically I think it's supposed to be explaining like what's going on in your imagination as you are walking to this arcade. And then you discover the arcade, you go down into the arcade, and sure enough, in there is, of course, a side-scrolling bullet hell shooter. I can't remember the name of the game, and all of the games in the game have names. That all rhymes, which is cool. But there's this cool bullet hell shooter, very reminiscent of R-Type. So you are, a ship flying from left to right. You've got enemies that come in swarms, and you have to defeat those enemies and avoid their shots. And if you shoot the right enemies, you will get a power-up that will make your ship more powerful. You go through a couple levels of that, and then, of course, there's another boss fight, which is really cool. After that, then you get to that cutscene where I was talking about with the girl and the car, and then you've got the Outrun version of the game, which is very, very well done. And I have to say, there's a point in the Outrun game where you hit a checkpoint, and you have a very long time to get to the next checkpoint. And as you're driving along, the narration starts to happen again, and it's talking about the metaphor of the highway for the game with a highway for getting out of suburbia and maybe starting your life someplace else. It's really interesting. And behind that narration, which is well voice acted, but behind that narration is some awesome synthwave music, which I am a huge, huge fan of synthwave music. It's incredibly 80s, and they just nailed the feeling of playing those old racing games with the checkpoints. So that was really awesome. And then after that, I ended up playing a level where it felt almost like one of those auto run levels of Shinobi, a fantastic arcade game, and a great Sega Genesis port, by the way. Where you are going from left to right, and a lot of left to right in here so far. And there's enemies that you got to hit with your sword, and you got to jump up and pick up orbs and avoid debris that would hurt you. You've got 6 or 7 health pips that you need to conserve as much as you can while getting through a couple of levels of that. I have not yet gotten to the boss battle. on that. I felt like I had gotten through enough of the game that I had a good idea of what was going on, and I could talk about this. Is again, this is supposed to be like my first look at the game, but because everything in the game is so different, I didn't feel like that kind of video would work for 1980X. So overall, my thoughts on 1980X after my first impressions are that it's really good. I'm enjoying it a lot. I wish that there was a way to skip the cutscenes for future playthroughs, but I think they're good and you want to experience them, so don't skip them your first time through. It is on the Nintendo Switch eShop. Just for full disclosure, I did receive this game as a review copy, but this is not an ad, and I'm just, let's find out exactly how much the game costs on the Nintendo Switch. It is $10. I just looked it up at Nintendo's website. It's $10. And I recommend that you check it out. I think that this game would do really, really well if it had a demo, because there's going to be a lot of people who this would appeal to. I think $10, I don't want to say it's too expensive, but it's expensive enough that it's going to scare away some people who would otherwise probably really, really enjoy the game. So if the publisher, which is 8-4, that's a great name for a publisher, World 8-4, at the end of Mario. Anyway, the publisher 8-4, if they could get the developer High-Bit Studios to make a demo of the game, I think that they would probably get a lot more sales, because this game is pretty cool, but I think the price tag is going to scare away people who might really, really like it. Anyway, if you didn't know, I've got a podcast called Nintendo Switchcraft, which you can check out wherever podcasts are downloaded. You can also watch it right here on this YouTube channel. And before you get out of here, if you thought this video was enjoyable at all, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and all that other YouTube nonsense that YouTubers ask you to do. I'm out of here. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.